Hi, I'm filmmaker and 360 creative coach Phil Svitek, and I want to share my experience of going to Annecy Festival for the very first time to give you an overview of what my experience was like. But more importantly, if you're someone that is considering going or has gotten your ticket but don't know what to expect because this is your first time going, I wanted to provide at least a lay of the land so that way it wouldn't be as overwhelming and you could have some way to orient yourself beyond just what the resources that the Annecy Festival puts out. Now, first and foremost, let's define what the Annecy Festival is. It's an animation festival. There's a festival component to it with lots of screenings for short films and feature films of all kinds, right, within animation. And then there's the market side, where there's buyers and sellers, people who have made movies and now are looking for distribution. There's also the exhibit side, where you have all these booths of technology companies, distributors, and so forth, like all kinds of people that have booths that you can walk around. Then there's the educational component. There are tons and tons of panels presenting and showcasing new works or past works, talking about how things got made, or presenting what will come down the line. It's just really incredible. And there's also a lot of students as well that attend that wanna break into the industry. So it's a nice mix of people who are just fans of animation that are there to watch movies, industry people there, and then there's the people that wanna break in. Lots and lots going on. This past festival, there was just over 18,000 people that attended from 118 countries. Really quite extraordinary, really quite big. Annecy itself is a town in France, close to the border of Switzerland. Really quaint, idyllic town, and just a perfect setting for this. And the festival generally happens in June of each year. Now I'd like to give you my experience of it. I'm gonna do it in a day-to-day chronological order to give you an overview of everything, and that should cover a lot. At the end, I'll kind of summarize everything in terms of the major takeaways, things that I might not have answered, all that good stuff. Yes, it's gonna be a little bit long, but the length is indicative of the value I'm trying to bring to it. I hope this is truly beneficial, and of course, if I miss anything, please comment down below or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek, or based on your experience, if there's stuff that I might have omitted or gotten wrong, then by all means correct me and things of that nature. I want this to be very communal. That's why I'm ultimately doing this. So the festival itself ran from June 8th to the 14th, 2025. That was for the full festival with the movies, but then the Mifa component, which is the market and exhibitions, that was from the 9th to the 13th specifically, but I wanted to participate in all of the festival. My aim was to get there a day earlier before it began and leave after it had ended. So that way, A, coming in, I could just acclimate a little bit, and B, I could experience everything. Just for some quick context, I also went with my mom. Her and I don't get to spend as much time together. Why not combine this into a trip where we get to spend some time together and she gets to see me in my element, and it's an idyllic town. And so, she can do hiking, biking, and all kinds of other stuff there as well. I left LA on Friday, June 6th. You're ultimately gonna fly to Geneva. Me being on the West Coast in LA, there is no direct flight. Geneva is about 40 or so kilometers away from Annecy, France. So you're flying into Switzerland and then going to France. We ended up buying tickets going from LAX to JFK to Geneva.
Bonjour, comment ça va? Es jour 3 de Annecy Festival. I'm walking, it's early morning. Getting here wasn't the smoothest, but we made it. Originally, we were supposed to fly from LA to JFK. There we had a short window of layover, and then JFK to Geneva. From Geneva, take a train or a bus to Annecy. We were supposed to arrive Saturday around 11 a.m. to Geneva, and then by like 2 or 3 be in Annecy. Fortunately, by the time everything happened, we got to Annecy at 8. Backtrack, when we got to JFK, our flight from LA was actually delayed, and that caused an issue at JFK. The plane had already taken off. Now, I wasn't the only one. It was actually other people that they were equally, let's say, for lack of a better term, distressed. Luckily, we managed to all get flights to Amsterdam, and then from Amsterdam to Geneva. Ended up delaying us ultimately by 5 hours. We were slightly nervous about the window from Amsterdam to Geneva because it was like an hour, but it ended up working out just fine. I did have to check in my luggage from JFK to Amsterdam, which I don't love to do. The first night we ended up exploring just the town after we settled in, just to kind of get a lay of the land. It was a bit dark, so it was not like the best. Like by the time we got going, it was like 9:30 already. We had a good dinner, but it's just tough to get your full bearings in nighttime.
The way to get to Annecy is you can go by train, you can go by bus. Now, this is where it was one of those, again, that, seemed easy and just wasn't. We got our tickets, and supposedly there was like one train that you can take where from the airport you take it, you get off at the next stop, and then you go straight into Annecy. Well, at the train, we got the ticket to Annecy, and then we asked like the conductors of like, hey, where do we go? And they were like, oh, take this train. So we're like, okay, took the train, but then, got off where we were told to get off, but then didn't know what to do from there. So we ended up kind of like backtracking, like we went to here, then we went there, then there and there. And finally we in a sense, lucked out at a place that both had a bus as well as a train. There was a train coming within 30 minutes. So we're like, okay, let's just take the train. But finally we got to Annecy. We actually were in a part that was a little bit to the west of Annecy, and it ended up being perfect because there's a bus stop right close to where we stayed. If you kind of go north or south, you can do it, but you want to stay kind of in the epicenter of what ultimately Annecy is.
One thing that I had forgotten is power adapters. I don't know why. For some reason this time I forgot. The outlets here are different. I found an electronics store nearby. They ended up being pretty costly. But then funny enough, at the market itself, they actually had quite a number of adapters for far, far cheaper, for literally half the price. I got 2 from there, made it a point to go return the other ones.
We went to pick up our badges around noontime, and there is an area near the Bon Louis building that has all the badge pickup stuff. And so regardless of your accreditation, you just get into the line, you wait, and then you pick up your badges. Once I picked up my badge, what I noticed was that there were these representatives, and there was a sign that said party invitation pickup or something along those lines. Basically invitations and party stuff. This was intriguing to me. Okay, do I have to go pick up some stuff? Within the initial website registration that I had done for the various events that I would be attending throughout the week, there is a section for parties that you are invited to. I was invited to one party that I was aware of in there. Because of that, I wanted to know are there other parties that I might be able to be a part of? And B, since I am invited to this one particular party, what do I do, right? Since you guys are here, you guys are as the representatives of the festival on behalf of this particular thing, let me ask you guys a question. I went in there. It's still a little bit confusing to me because on certain things, you do need to pick up an actual ticket. On the only thing that I was invited to, I didn't need to pick up anything because I had my registration, it's all good. They would scan my badge and I could get right in. From my perspective, it's always better to be safe than sorry, right? My main piece of advice is just ask, right? If you're there and see something, ask them about it. What is this? One booth, regardless of what accreditation you have, whether the Festival Plus, the Mifa badge, or the student badge, whatever, is pick up yourself a bus pass. You know, it's relatively cheap. It's like €2, give or take. But that's gonna start to add up, plus you're gonna have to carry cash or whatever. They have multiple days, right? You can get like 4 days, 5 days, or 7 days, I think. We ended up getting a 7-day bus pass through Annecy. Ended up being like €11 each. A really sweet deal. All within the same place where you pick up your badge. Very convenient and would highly, highly recommend. So now we've gotten this. They give you tons of good information like maps, the program schedule, and yada yada. One of the first things that I wanted to do that day was kind of hit up these exhibits. There's a ton of exhibits that they put on. One in particular was the Arcane exhibit. Me and my mom went and we went through the thing, saw it. Great exhibit. After that, what we hadn't explored was the Imperial Hotel, which is where all the various exhibits and the Mifa portion of the festival was gonna be. So we walked there and we knew like nothing was gonna be happening there, but I just wanted to see it. So I got to explore all the various things there. And then there's the Mifa campus. So we went there, just seeing what's in relation to each other. I thought it was just these big sort of things. And then maybe they had like the exhibits here and there. There's actually a ton of other places, especially for the screenings, that are kind of all over the place.
The biggest thing that I learned sort of day one is how big this place is. There's a lot to it. So right now I'm walking from one of the main places called Bon Louis to the Imperial Palace. You know, it's a beautiful walk, just a little bit long. Now, I originally thought it was just those two sort of main locations, and everything, you know, there might be like a tent offshoot here and there, or a boutique offshoot here and there. What I didn't realize is how spread out it actually can be, particularly with like exhibitions and screenings. Those are really spread out through the city. Speaking of the Sunday market, there was a sign that said work in progress on one of the buildings. What are they working on? Well, come to find out that it's actually literally a screening place for work in progress films. There's a couple of screenings that I was scheduled to go to. I learned like an hour away. There was just no way I was going to be able to get to that. The schedule was packed, which is a bummer because I do want to see some of the short films.
You kind of have to pick and choose your day in many ways. Like, it's not to say like you can't bounce around, but A, you want to account for the time that it takes to get to these various places, and B, it'll limit you of what you can see or do. So for the most part, I just kind of picked a location each day and would stay there and make the most of it. One of the people that we're working with, she had turned me onto this notion that one of our contacts was going to be at the Women in Animation Summit. So the Women in Animation had panels throughout the day. I was actually already like signed up for one of them, which was the future of adult animation, because that seemed relevant to me. I saw that there was a panel before the one that I was scheduled for, so I was like, well, let me try to get to that one and see if I can make it in. I say all that because this is a good lesson. Depending on the badge you have, you can either sign up for 1 event a day or 3 events a day. But the thing is, the events go pretty darn quick. I managed to sign up for 3 things every single day because I wanted to make sure like I had an agenda each of those days. But, you know, were they certainly my top choices? No, not necessarily. No. I was open to a lot of those things. Now, if you don't get to sign up for what you wanted to, they do have lines. They have ones with the reservation and ones without the reservation. So with the exception of one time, I was able to get into every single event that I wanted to without a reservation. Now, the bigger the panel, the harder of a chance you will have of doing that. But if you go to like the Grand Theater, for example, in the Bon Louis building, you know, you're gonna have a less of a chance of doing that. Also to note, even with the reservation, you have to get there 10 minutes ahead. Otherwise, like if you're past that mark, then that's when they allow everyone else. And if all of a sudden that fills up, even with the reservation, you're kind of shit out of luck. So on Monday, you know, I knew that the start of the event was gonna be at 9:30. So I wanted to get there, be in line at definitely by 9. And luckily I got right in. You know, I had literally an itinerary of stuff to do for that day. What ended up happening was I stayed at the Women in Animation panel. Then there was the next panel right after that, which I was actually registered for. And then they broke for lunch. Funny enough, I was invited to go with them to lunch. I wasn't registered or whatever, but they said, you know, hey, we might be able to get you in. You know, I said that to the person checking people in, and she was like, you know what, wait like 10 minutes, we'll see if we can get you in. Not thinking that it'll happen, I was like, okay, well, clearly they don't have a spot for me, but I came back 10 minutes and lo and behold, they did.
And they were like, oh, yes, we actually do have open spots, so we'll see you at table 7. Yeah, it's basically a networking event where you get sat with people you don't necessarily know, and you get to obviously have lunch. Yeah, it was a really fun lunch. There was like 6 of us, including myself. First of all, great food. The lunch was at the Imperial Palace, so it was wonderful, wonderful food. But also the people were just wonderful. Some people worked in software, some people worked in talent acquisition, things of that nature. So it was just great to gain a different perspective of the different jobs across the animation spectrum.
And it's just such an intimate thing because we all get to know each other, both professionally but also personally. So it was a really wonderful event. And then they had other great panels for the rest of the evening. So I was scheduled to go to a short film screening later in the afternoon. I ended up not doing that because that's also when I learned like, oh, this theater is not where I thought it was. I thought it was at the other location, which is 1.2 kilometers away. This is like farther away, and I have to like, you know, it'd be like a 40-minute bus ride. I was like, okay, I don't think I'm gonna make that one. And my mom was actually scheduled to go with me to that, but I said, let's just skip it. We were gonna also do an outdoor screening that started at 10, but I was just so exhausted that around like 6 or 8, just do dinner. So my mom and I regrouped, we had dinner, enjoyed each other's company, and then just went back knowing that like essentially it was going to be a long week. I had already a great day with the Women in Animation panel, so figured that was worth it. That's what I call official day 1 and 2. Tuesday, June 10th was the start of the exhibitors as part of the Mifa portion of Annecy. While there were panels starting on Monday, June 9th, the actual exhibits themselves, they were just being set up on Monday, and then they opened up on Tuesday. So this is when the festival really kicked into gear and there was going to be so much going on. And heading into Tuesday, I had quite an agenda for myself. I wanted to go to the Mifa recruitment session. Then one of the big things I wanted to check out was the Japan Animates the Future. I mean, in large part because the project I'm working on with the Arbiters is an anime, so knowing what the future of Japanese animation holds, I really wanted to know that. Then I was scheduled to see the reinvention of TeamTO, which is a French studio that's been around for 20 years. Then real-time rigging with Unreal, story to screen by Weta FX, and then a 40 years of Mifa celebration, followed by, at the end of the night, a cocktail party that was originally slated for 8 p.m. but actually got moved to 10 p.m. A big day for me. Now, some of the stuff, as I'll go over, actually did end up happening, but a lot of stuff got reshuffled. So the Women in Animation pitch session, it started at 9, and there was 5 women that presented, and it was a wide range of all kinds of pitches that were essentially given. One of them was kind of like a horror, and it was really dark and pulled from all kinds of mythology that was really fun. And there was this one kids show with intergalactic beings, and they were all smart, but also they've got their weaknesses and stuff like that, which was a lot of fun. Then, you know, one of them was a combination of like Ghostbusters meets a pup named Scooby-Doo, and it was really awesome. There was one that was kind of not like a Zootopia, but in that sort of sense, but with a different twist, right? When I say all these things, it's just more of an entry point into what some of these pitches were about.
So yeah, my show is called The Gin Busters. So who are the Gins before we begin? They're known as genies in the West, and in the East, they're known as these supernatural entities that have a myriad of magical abilities like super strength, the ability to fly, mind reading, and if you ask my mom, then she has all sorts of stories.
And so I was really inspired by these pitches. And, you know, the cool part is that as I watched the pitches, any questions that I might have had were ultimately answered in the pitch for the most part. And that's a sign of a good pitch. Comparing it to the pitch sessions that I've been a part of, whether through Emerson College or at the American Film Market, those are a lot shorter. So with these pitches, they had 10 minutes and they could use audio and visual stuff, right? So they can have slideshows, they can have video, they can have sound effects, whatever they wanted, it was all part of it. And that was a lot better because it just allowed for a more truer pitch. Afterwards, again, in these smaller sort of sessions, you get to go up to these people, these participants, and ask them questions and whatever else. And it was really cool, just to get to know the filmmakers and just ultimately say to them, like, congratulations, I truly mean it that these pitches were inspiring, and even if not every project was my cup of tea, let's say, I really wanted them to succeed. There's a lot of passion behind it. After this, I rushed over to the Japan Animates panel. Now, this was first come, first serve, so there was no reservation. The session I was a part of ended at 10:30. The Japanese one started at 10:45, so I had a 15-minute window, but with me going up and speaking with the filmmakers and so forth, that ate into that 15-minute window. So by the time I got downstairs, they were like, sorry, we're completely full. So this was one of the first ones that I didn't get into. In fact, as I recall, the only panel that I didn't get into at all. So, which was a bummer because I wanted to be a part of it. So what I chose to do was essentially to go through the exhibits. So this was the first day that it was open. So I went to certain booths that I found interesting and just asked very basic questions. And I wish I recorded some of these as more like interview style, and almost did like a true journalistic viewpoint of like, hey, what's there? And so I could present it to the world, right? During this downtime that I had, I ate, got a lay of the land, the exhibit, and so forth. And then I went to inside the reinvention of TeamTO. As I mentioned, this was a French studio, and this was in the Salle de la Voyer at the Imperial Palace. TeamTO was a company that fell on my radar because of Animation Magazine, and they had written up that essentially they got bought out by this Italian studio. Essentially this was going to be their big welcoming of like where they're headed next. And what I appreciate about them was the animation space, the entertainment industry, the world at large in many ways has a lot of unknowns, is not necessarily in the best of situations. This was a true presentation. Like, yes, it was pitchy and salesy, but it was also a bold claim of like, let's not be afraid. Let's continue to push forward in the right way and be strategic about it. And seeing what this company was doing in terms of that was really awe-inspiring. The second part was showcasing their directors and the projects that they're working on that'll be coming up soon enough. One of the directors was named Jay Olivia, and he went last in terms of this presentation. Everyone was so articulate and stuff like that, and he joked like, oh man, I have to follow that up and whatever else. But man, what I appreciate about him is he was so well-spoken. And the reason he was so well-spoken was because he was the person that wasn't just talking about his project, but was really kind of giving information to filmmakers in general about the process, And he was talking about how he used various techniques that, might seem costly, but he's like, whatever budget you gave me, I'll work with it. And I know like, okay, I know how to do very specific lighting for something because I don't need to light the entire scene. I just need to do it shot by shot. And so it was just great to hear a different methodology, right? And just that mindset. And it reminded me very much of like the Mavericks I love, like Robert Rodriguez, Wong Kar-wai, Richard Linklater, people like that. Even like a Greta Gerwig, let's say, like to just kind of go for it. I wanted to go to the real-time rigging in Unreal Engine. That was at the Mifa campus. By the time I finished up with the TeamTO, it was kind of late. Their panel started late, so I didn't have time to get to the Mifa campus. So given the time constraint, I decided to go to a panel about AI. Obviously AI is a big subject in all industries, all disciplines of the world, but entertainment and certainly animation are two industries that have to grapple with AI. And so I wanted to kind of see firsthand, what's happening and so forth. It was being presented by a filmmaker who used AI. Essentially, they can take live action footage and replace a human person with a digital character. One of the things that they were talking about is they work with the filmmakers and they're trying to be ethical about it. What ethical AI is, right? Because one person's definition could be different than another person's definition. There is this notion that I wonder about in regards to ethical AI. The reason why they call it ethical AI is because they're paying for the data sets to train their AI models with. I've been approached to essentially license or give my footage to an AI company for X amount of money and so forth. So it's like I would have been getting paid, but the thing that we don't discuss enough, it's like, okay, was that a decent rate? Was it not a decent rate? Now all of a sudden, okay, you might be getting paid some money, but should you be getting residual on that, you know, because oftentimes it's just like a one-time fee and then that's it, you know? So you might get seemingly decent money up front, but how much did you give away in the long term, right? So as someone who's kind of at least explored said option and really thought about what ethical AI is, and not that I'm this expert in any of it, you know, I'm curious and I want to learn more. And so I figured I'd just share this little bit of info as far as like what companies mean ethical AI to be. If, you know, you ever get approached about licensing footage, if you're a filmmaker, right, that's their attempt to be quote unquote ethical. I would still encourage you to do your due diligence and really kick the tires, see, you know, if that's truly right for you. That was cool. And then there was a cocktail reception after that. It was a lot of fun, you know. I did end up literally missing everything else that I was scheduled for, but I met a lot of very good people and things of that nature, so it was all worthwhile. And then time flew. The party for Mifa started at 10 o'clock. It was a lot of fun. You know, anyone who seemed like essentially accredited for the Mifa part, and that included students, could go. It was a worthwhile event to get to know people. You know, at first it was kind of like a slow start. I expected to see people there, but they were at other parties, I later on learned. So all the people that I was expecting there weren't there. So I essentially had to make new friends. The nice part, I will admit, like all these cocktail parties, whether this one or the other ones, it's free drink and food everywhere. But I decided around midnight to just start getting home. But that was Tuesday, yeah. So Wednesday, June 11th was another day that I had various things planned. So I wanted to go to this Meet the Producers Gap Financing event, then see the French animation market, AI for film animation, then kind of meet the buyers. There was a thing called Introducing Tangerine and Yuzu, which is the technology that TeamTO kind of created. At a different location, the Bon Louis building was kind of what's next on Netflix, animation, and then midnight specials for short films. So that's kind of what my schedule was supposed to be like, or at least what I intended. When I went to the Gap financing sessions, I walked in the door, and what I had discovered is that even though on the website itself that I was using to register for these various events, it said that the Gap sessions were first come, first serve, it was first come, first serve via a registration that happened months ago, separately of the registration that you do for these events. And if that sounds confusing, trust me, I was confused as you. But allow me to try to clarify it just a little bit. There's these kind of sessions, right? Whether it's Gap financing, meet the producers, meet the sales agents, meet composers, various like meet and greet sessions. Those have a separate registration from any of this. So obviously you have to be registered for Annecy to begin with, right? You can't even begin to register for these things without that in place. But once you have that in place, I believe sometime in March or April, you have to essentially denote your interest. And especially for something like Gap financing, where there can be particular interest of filmmakers who are trying to get the final bit of funding for their project, they want to be selective, right? They want to allow these lenders, for lack of a better term, the opportunity to pick who they might actually want to meet with. So in that sense, it's good because if you do end up with a meeting, then it means that the people you're meeting with have an interest in whatever it is that you're presenting. But you have to kind of plan for that accordingly. So I didn't end up getting my Annecy Festival, the registration that like I can attend Annecy in general. I didn't get that until early May, which was already a month or so past the deadline of when I would have even need to have thought about registering for the gap financing meeting. There's a lot of components that go into it. The best advice I have is get your registration for Annecy done early, and then look at all the things that could be available to you. If there's one that you're like absolutely dying to be a part of, get in touch with the festival organizers so that way you can have complete clarity over what the process for that particular thing may be. Because you don't want to find yourself, as I did, thinking that gap financing is first come, first serve. Hey, I'll just show up. And they're like, no, you're not registered. So unfortunately, because of that, I did not get to attend the gap financing session. So instead, what I ultimately did was I scheduled tutorial with Toon Boom Storyboard Pro. Because I couldn't go to the producer's gap financing thing, right next door was a Korean animation pitch session. So I was like, all right, why not? I've seen one set of pitches. Let me see what's going on in Korea. And if I'm being honest, I was particularly interested in this one because South Korea is infusing $1 billion in the next couple of years towards their animation, and specifically adult animation for theatrical, because they want to compete on a global scale. Kind of the same format as with the women in animation pitching. You have 5 pitches, 10 minutes each, and then at the end you get a Q&A. Now, the thing with this one was that ultimately these are Korean people and English isn't necessarily their native language. So there was a translator there. You could tell the preparation each of these people put in towards their project to make sure they could pitch in English, even if it was truly not a language that they were comfortable with. It just kind of ultimately put a lot of things in perspective for me, about these panels in general are in English. So I'm very privileged, right, from that standpoint that they are essentially catering to me. Even though there's 118 countries, as far as these actual pitches, they were really amazing, Honestly, like throughout the whole thing, I didn't see a bad pitch. These were truly phenomenal. As far as this one, what was interesting, there was one that was like a horror animated one. And because we're in an animation market, they talked about kind of the animation part of it and so forth. But it's a movie that's near complete. A lot of these were in different phases, but a lot of them were like early on sort of development, pre-production, maybe just started production. But this one was like near completion. So I went up to the woman afterwards and I said, listen, I can't really help you that much, but I gave her the distribution companies that I know of that are looking for horror. But I also said, listen, as you continue on your path, with these companies, everyone's looking for horror. Horror sells. So the fact that it's an animated movie, I think is secondary. I think that's nice and you can not hide it, but I don't think you have to lead with that. Just lead with the fact that it's a great horror. This is my perspective. Listen, right or wrong, I don't know, but ultimately, this is where I'm coming from. So I was actually invited to their booth afterwards to speak with some of them. So basically, various parts of the world, so whether it's Japan, I think they group together African countries a little bit, but you have people from the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, you had South American countries. Them as representatives also had exhibits. You had these pavilions of these different countries, and so South Korea had a section that you can visit and speak with representatives of the country, both in terms of, let's say, the government, producers, the filmmakers themselves, and so forth. And so I was invited to go there, met some of the filmmakers, and one of the filmmakers I really resonated with, and I loved his project, felt I had some connections that I could help him out with, and also felt like, what, I like this style, maybe there's a way for us to work together. Afterwards, I went to the Toon Boom session. That was a great tutorial. Alex gave me an hour of his time. I recorded it. You can check out that video, very insightful. I thought it was just gonna be for me and my animation team, but then I realized, this is really great stuff that I'd love to share.
So this is the user interface, or the workspace of Storyboard Pro, and several different windows that you can work in. Each window can have several different tabs depending on what it is you're actually trying to accomplish within the software as well.
But then I wanted to attend another AI for animation panel. This was at 1:30. it was first come, first serve again. So it was like, once I was done with Toon Boon, I was like, let me get there. Luckily, I got there fast enough and was able to stay in line. Yes, it was a pretty popular session. And essentially, they debated like, how AI should be approached and things like that. I will say the tough part about these panels is that there's a lot of introduction stuff, which I don't necessarily know how you can like get away from, of like, who this person is and give them their background and what they're working on and how they're like utilizing AI. So I would say like the first 10 to 15 minutes is really just kind of this introductory part to really lay out the landscape of terminology, context, and so forth, to then have the discussion. Through no fault of their own, felt incomplete. I will give them credit. They had kind of varying perspective of people who were utilizing AI, were starting to dab into AI, people who were not necessarily against AI, but were more cautionary of it. So I appreciated how represented things felt. And I also appreciate like at the end, in terms of the Q&A, some people asked very hard questions, especially for the filmmakers who were utilizing AI. And I appreciate the filmmakers' willingness to not shy away from those hard questions. Did that, had a little bit of downtime, got some food and things of that nature. Went to see a couple of more booths. I actually had a session with some other sort of exhibitors that I got to know. So I scheduled some time there just to kind of deep dive a little bit further. I didn't realize this when I registered for it, because this was a couple weeks in advance. This was a panel to introduce Tangerine and Yuzu, which are tools that are made by TeamTO. I didn't know that at the time, but it happened to be quite serendipitous. So I went, I heard their presentation. It was a demo session, so they kind of showcased what the tool was and stuff like that. And on the surface, it seems like a very useful, interesting tool. I'd love to like really learn how it works and how I can apply it to my stuff. Like I'd be interested to learn that side of under the hood, let's say. First off, it's interesting that like a lot of people fear sitting in front. Granted, a lot of times like the first 2 rows were sectioned off for invited guests. But in this case, there was a couple of seats in the front that weren't reserved. And whereas everyone like kind of sits more towards the middle, maybe towards the back, like it's always funny, like the first set, like they're always so scared to come in and sit in the front. Whereas for me, like if I'm going to the panel, I want to be as close to the people as possible and I want to hear it firsthand. So I sat right in the front, just getting to know like TeamTO, quite serendipitously in the way that I did. I spoke with one of the key figures afterwards and was really curious about like what they were up to and stuff like that. And he graciously accepted a meeting. So he's like, hey, schedule it with my assistant. And I don't have anything bad to say about TeamTO. Whether or not I ever work with them is beside the point. I wish them the best of luck. They're just a great team. So afterwards, I actually had a short amount of time to get to the next location, which was at the Bon Louis. And unfortunately, things just got so delayed. There was just no way like I was gonna get 1.2 kilometers to the next event. Because now that I knew that, like even if you're registered for an event, if you don't get there 10 minutes in advance, like, they let you go. Just kind of accepted the fact and, leaned into, there's kind of cocktail receptions that I was invited to. So it was really great. And you blink and all of a sudden, it's nighttime, even though it's still visible. I was slated to go to the midnight screenings, but I was like, you know what, I'm just already exhausted. The next day is gonna be another like long session. As much as it sucks, I was like, let me just skip that. As much as you wanna go to the screenings, and I really did. I wanted to see animation, I wanted to see the filmmakers, and that stuff you can theoretically see anytime. Maybe not literally in practice, but in theory, you could see it at any point. The panels, meeting people and stuff like that, you can't make that happen. The insane part is like, basically from 4 p.m. on, there's like a cocktail reception every hour on the hour, and there's like hundreds of them. Interestingly enough, Netflix, after their presentation, did their own party. And what a massive party this was. They rented out a chateau or a castle, but it's like kind of at the top of the hill. It's a main monument of Annecy, and my mom and I went there and checked it out because it's a museum. And like, wow, to have rented this place, like it was just insane. Just that night alone, that was like one party of literally probably like dozens. The stuff that's kind of more at the Imperial Hotel, those are like sort of by invitation, but some of them are more open, easier to get into rather. So anyway, that wrapped up Wednesday, June 11th. So by day 5, which was Thursday, June 12th, I, along with Others were pretty exhausted, but this was actually, for me, set up to be my biggest day because there was a bunch of panels that I really, really wanted to see. So as much as I was kind of in flux throughout the whole week and could alternate, there was 2 panels that I was registered for that I definitely just absolutely wanted to make. And then I had a very important meeting later in the evening, so I had to be prepared for that. So one of the things going into each day I knew is I want to pack light. You know, after a certain point, you learn that any items in your bag just add so much weight. And so the idea of carrying a computer was just too much. Even like a MacBook Air, as light as it may be, you just want like the bare minimal, because if you're carrying around any sort of weight on your back from morning till essentially midnight, your shoulders start to go to crap. But this was a day that I knew I needed my computer for the meeting, so I made sure I had everything that I needed: chargers, adapters, you know, the computer, having everything. I usually just took my iPad, and that's overall how I managed to talk about my project, which was the Arbiters. You know, even though I had tons and tons of material, I figured let's just keep things digitally in that way so I could pull out the tablet, show them the proof of concept, the video for that, as well as the pitch deck, any artwork. Like, it was all loaded up, and the fact that it wasn't printed, it's okay, you know, not the worst thing in the world. My first event that morning was Crunchyroll session. They were gonna talk about their studio focus, what they were up to, and things of that nature. And given that I'm creating an anime, knowing what Crunchyroll, which is basically a big platform in the anime space and has done a lot of research and stuff like that, knowing what they know first and foremost is beneficial. Unlike for some of the smaller studios, this was very much like no photos, no video, nothing, right? So the higher up these studios are, the more protective they were of the work, and you could tell that they were serious about it. But it was a incredible pitch in terms of where the anime market stands. I took down a bunch of great notes, got a lot of great resources. They highlighted what they're creating, and man, it's really, really exciting. My big fear was that this was gonna run over. So all the other sort of events that I've been involved in have started late and kind of ended late. Not by a lot, but you know, enough to like mess me up, you know, especially when you have a tight schedule. And this, afterwards, I needed to rush over to the Bon Louis, the other side of the lake, for Raphael Bob-Waksberg session, you know, kind of like a masterclass. And he's the creator of BoJack Horseman. He's worked on one of my favorite shows, Undone, and he was going to talk about his new project, Long Story Short, which is coming out on Netflix. I wanted to make the Crunchyroll and Raphael's thing, but I knew I had a tight window. Luckily, Crunchyroll ended. You know, again, it's one of those things like the smaller, more intimate studios or projects, you can kind of go up to people right after. Crunchyroll was this one where they played out kind of a final video, and the person presenting had left. That was fine for me ultimately because I had to rush over. So the Google Maps said it would take me 19 minutes. It ended up taking me about 12. I didn't run, but I just speed walked. So as soon as I got there, I was let in, you know, the Grand Theater. This was my first time there. Like, I've been in the building, but I've never been inside the theater. It's a big, big ass room for sure. To fill out that space is incredible. They did fill it out. Like, pretty much every seat by the time this thing started was taken. Raphael was amazing. So it was 2 people on stage, 1 person interviewed Raphael, and they talked essentially about his journey from, you know, how he got into the business, how he created BoJack, a little bit about Undone, and then they talked about Long Story Short. You understood Raphael's appeal, why Netflix would buy a show from this guy, why anyone would buy a show from this guy, why anyone would work with this guy. He gave out so much wonderful information. He was hilarious. I truly appreciated him as a person, talking about how expanding, you know, the boundaries of what they could do. And, you know, he is in many ways like a creative genius, if you want to call it that. I would. I don't know if he'll dispute that, but I certainly would point that at him. But he's also very humble and kind and enveloping, where when talking about Undone, he paused and said, hey, Undone was a big international co-production. How many people in the audience here worked on Undone? And a lot of people raised their hand. And he's like, give yourself a shout out. And he talked about, you know, his various partners. And with Undone, while he was obviously very instrumental, it was Kate Purdy's show, and you know, he talked about supporting her and the ways that, you know, he went about that sense that everyone's just uplifting each other. There's no sense of ego and everyone's working towards a common goal. Like it was just so reinvigorating. Long story short, the new Netflix series that's coming out by him, we got to see the first episode and man, it is amazing. Now I will say again, going back to this idea that they were very strict about these sort of sessions, no pictures, no video, anything of that nature. They were serious. Like anyone that even took out their phone, like they walked them right out. Security came and walked them right out. Now, I bring this up, A, because of the severity of it, but also, why would you want to do that, right? Why spoil something? Like, don't be stupid. They've told you multiple times. Like, it's not like you're finding this out for the first time. They're saying like, hey, please don't do this. This will prevent us from doing these kinds of cool things in the future. You know, the part about security having to usher people away, number one, they're having to go into rows to grab these people. So it's very disruptive to everyone else. And then the person that took out their phone, they're trying to plead and beg to like, you know, be left to stay. So it turns into like a 30-second, 40-second argument. It's not like everyone was doing this. It was enough to cause a distraction. That's shitty. Why, you know, don't be that person. So that finished up. That was a wonderful thing. I truly enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed everything, right? Ultimately is what I'm saying. You know, then I had time for a quick lunch and I had to get back to the Imperial Hotel where I was registered to see the Mifa documentary pitches. And I wanted to see this because at the time, this was the only thing that I was registered for as far as pitches. So I was like, okay, you know, I want to see at least some pitches. I was also curious how people were approaching documentary work via animation. Went in there, got a chance to see the various work, and there's some very inspiring things. And you know, the biggest thing that when it comes to documentary work is like, how do you justify the animation side of it? And each of the projects did justify it. Like there was one in particular that told very personal stories about this Berlin train station where Ukraine refugees were coming into and people from Berlin were helping them out. And so there's a lot of pre-recorded conversations, whether from the refugees or, you know, the volunteers from Berlin. So it's a very moving piece, but you know, you don't want to show them or you might not have the footage. And so doing it through animation allowed for a sense of that coming to life in essence, right? Another one was a series of short films about, for lack of a term, women's issues. The idea is that they have interviews, but then they also overlay photos of doctors' visits and things of that nature. And then they draw characters over it very simplistically to help illustrate kind of this stuff and destigmatize the places. So that way the people themselves tell their story, but don't have to like record in intimate settings. But also the viewer starts to see themselves in those places, you know, like a doctor's office, and relate more to the story that's being told. So I thought that was really wonderful. Then there was a documentary about kind of forgotten history of European countries. So, you know, each country would have like a historian, they would work with various lyricists because it was like told through song and unveils like a forgotten truth about this country, right? Kind of like in America, how we try to suppress certain aspects of our history, whether slavery or anything like that, and bring it to the forefront, which I thought was very meaningful. Then by this point, right, day 5, you know various people, and so you kind of see them out and about and you catch up and whatever else. So it's really nice in that way. And the sort of cumulative effect, I imagine, over years, like, you know, now I got to know various people this year. If I go next year, whatever the subsequent years, I get to say hi to the people that I met this first year. So it gives me that grounding, but then you get to meet more and more people. Like, it's just really wonderful in that networking sort of a way, for sure. And then I went to the Future of Animation Studios. It was a panel, and I was curious, you know, like, how are people handling it? You know, what is the state of the animation studio and how are people approaching it? Now, I will say, you know, it's one of those things that throughout the week you hear, like, you know, animation's in a precarious state. And so you try to get the definition, well, what does that truly mean, right? And so they define kind of where we're at. And I get it, it's hard, right? You don't want to lie about anything that's going on, but I think there are levers of options and choices to make that aren't like nefarious or anything like that, but that we need to test out and try. Going back to like the TeamTO presentations, that's what I appreciated a lot about it, because they were bold in their approach. Like, they understood the realities, but they weren't going to be hampered by it. They were still going to move forward in a smart and strategic way. It's not like they were going to go willy-nilly and just, spend money, let's say, on stupid stuff, but they weren't going to be hampered by it. And so I wish this had more of an uplifting tone. Unfortunately, it didn't, but I still got enough takeaways from that to make it worthwhile. So after that, I wanted to see Japanese feature animations in progress. That seemed like a very interesting thing, but apparently so did everyone else. The line to get in, and it was actually a pretty small room, so there was just no way I was ever getting in, unfortunately. It was a bummer, but I reshuffled, and literally next door there was a panel discussion on webtoon and animation. So webtoon, as the name might imply, they're online comics. They're a major craze for this. Like, I've heard of it sort of, but I didn't know that necessarily the term, and I didn't know how big the space was. And so they were talking about how webtoons translate and become animations. And so they had 3 different guests, one who's directly working with webtoon people, one who's animating, and one who's kind of like a distributor. And so it was nice to essentially get the full pipeline in there. And it was also nice because 2 of the presenters there, one person was from the Korean animation pitch event that I went to. Another was named Sydney Bright, who was at the Women in Animation panel for adult animation specifically. It's cool, again, you're starting to see a recurring cast of characters. It was a wonderful presentation, I really enjoyed it. I got to, go up to them, say hi afterwards, and it's not necessarily like webtoons, something that I think is in my immediate future, but that doesn't mean it's not a viable path for others, and me learning about it, I think is beneficial. Like, that's part of why you go to Annecy, is to get a lay of the land, like who's doing what are trends, what are opportunities, and some you'll take, others you'll at least know about, and that's good. Afterwards, I had a little bit of time, and so there was meeting with all the animation people from the Czechia, rather, as it's called now. And because I'm Slovak, yes, they're different, but I wanted to at least see people that spoke similar enough language, like it's like English versus British, and I just wanted to say hi and see what they were up to. Now, unfortunately, because of the preparation for the meeting, there was some stuff. It ended up being canceled, unfortunately. And because of that, there was some follow through. So I got to go into the cocktail party with the Czechs for like 5 minutes, unfortunately. And then I had to take a phone call. Not that it was a bad phone call, but we just had to re-strategize on some things. And we did. It was just a lengthy call and a productive call. And, I will say this, as bummed as I was, if I'm being honest, in the moment that the meeting got canceled, in the grand scheme of things, it actually ends up being good, and it allows us to reshuffle a little bit. And then after that, it was actually, fairly late. I was sort of exhausted and got dinner and pretty much went home to just, for all intents and purposes, crash, because I was just so tired. So that was day 5, Thursday, June 14th. Quick side tangent. Each day, one of the things, like whenever I got home, as late as it was, I would make it a point to email all the people that I met that day, because I knew if I held off on it, I would end up with like hundreds of business cards and not know where I'd met them, who did what, and just like the personal anecdotes. So that night, while it was still fresh in my mind, I went through each contact card and emailed them and said, hey, it was great to meet you, and put in just kind of how we met and what we discussed and things of that nature. So at least like it's there, it's initiated, and whether or not they respond right away, that was beside the point. Is much more about like just having that connection initiated. Friday, June 13th. In many ways, this was when I had the least amount of stuff sort of planned. Since it's the last day of the Mifa event, a lot of things, would be shutting down. At this point in time, I was bummed about the canceled meeting. And, going into this, I was like, okay, let's make the most of this day. There was TUI Animation, who's done like Dragon Ball, iconic work. They are spinning off another studio specifically for young creators to be able to like essentially launch their careers. And so they were showcasing that. It was a really fun panel, and they're being very strategic about it, and they want it to be self-sustaining. So they're rolling out very, very slowly. And first, they're going to start internally with their people, and that makes sense, right? So I got to go to that, and that was actually at the campus. So even though I'd been there the day that they were still prepping, you know, I hadn't seen anything. So this was my actual first time seeing it in full swing, and there's lots of stuff going on there. Not that I'm bummed that I participated more in those things. I think I, you know, chose what I chose, but it's good to know now, having a lay of the land. And this was like a lot of like demo sessions where you get to really test out certain things. So I'm glad I went there, experienced it. Then there was something that I was scheduled to go at 11, but time got away from me as it usually does. And then I had a 1 p.m. meeting at the exhibits with someone from South America talking about, you know, their producer, and I had seen their work, and you know, just wanted to meet them essentially. Like, they seemed kind of my spirit, and I didn't know ways we can ultimately help each other or whatever, but I just wanted to kind of meet them, and luckily we did, and I'm not sure anything will necessarily come out of it, but it's just, again, nice to know that there's people, like-minded people out there. So Animation Magazine, as well as a few other companies, put on a picnic in the garden. So this was across the lake, you know, close to the Bon Louis in Old Town Annecy. They hosted kind of this picnic. So I went to that, met a lot of wonderful people there. And the thing about this one was obviously more open because it's just a picnic and it's at a public park. So it's not like it's tapered off or anything. People that didn't even necessarily know about this picnic ahead of time just kind of managed to see people with badges, you know, walked over and had a good time. And that's the other thing, like, you know, you're always kind of carrying your badge around. And so, it's always easy to know who's part of the Annecy Festival and who's not. In that way, you can strike a conversation of like, hey, you're here, you know, I'm here, we're waiting in line, or we're on the bus, we're this. It's just nice to have that identifier. And so, like, whenever I went, even if like it was quote unquote, let's say off hours and I was just walking around the town or whatever, like I always had my badge. So that way, you know, potentially conversations could spark. I ended up going back to the Imperial Building. Actually, like, did one last walk through the exhibit. A lot of places were like essentially shut down, you know, even though like the official end time wasn't until a little bit later, but a lot of booths like had already packed up, left. So this was like kind of like a last call, goodbye. And it really starts to hit you of like, hey, this has been such an intense, enriching experience, and it's really coming to an end. You know, like, this is it. So it was a very bittersweet sort of realization, but I'm glad I got to kind of walk through, say goodbye to the various people that I met. Now, the interesting part is, at least from my experience so far between Annecy and the American film market, you know, people always tell you have a pitch ready. And as I made mention, like, I saw a lot of pitches this week that were those 10-minute pitches with visuals and slideshows and whatnot, very well prepared. I've done that. Like, I've prepared for multiple pitches, and yet so far from my experience, I always have like a very short time because we're looking through the slides, me giving brief overview, like giving more of an elevator pitch and initiating that conversation enough to get people to want to read the script, let's say, see more details. In very rare instances, people have actually read the script and the fact that they like it, so then I don't have to give the full pitch. And I'm not saying either is good or bad. I'm just saying that's my experience of it. So if anything, just always be prepared for a more formal pitch, but then also a very informal, like, quick pitch. And it made mention that, you know, I carry around my iPad and I had the proof of concept, the pitch deck and stuff like that. And there were plenty of opportunities that arose where people were like curious to know about my project. And so, you know, I would whip it out and, you know, let's say you're at a cocktail party, like, just, you've got to do it quickly to present, you know, what you're talking about. Now, you might not be in that position necessarily, but at the same time, if you're an animator and you want to present what you're capable of, or your studio and what you're working on and going to be releasing soon, like, there's a version of it for everybody ultimately. And so just knowing that in the back of your mind and being able to be ready to present that, I think is, you know, very important. Friday, June 13th wrapped out. I was truly, you know, wiped. A lot of people were leaving that night. So for the most part, I was like, you know what, I can go home, I can rest. And like, I got home at like 8:30 and just went to sleep. The next day, Saturday, June 14th, really was just a personal day. So we started off with my mom and I kind of hanging out and doing stuff together. That really tapered off, certainly by midweek. And, you know, by the end of the week, we weren't really seeing each other. So this was a chance to kind of reconnect again and do stuff collectively. She'd done a lot of stuff on her own, whether it was hiking, biking, and so forth. So she had a lay of the land and wanted to take me around the lake and see the various stuff that she saw. So we did that. It was a lot of fun. Obviously, I went there for the animation market, but if there's one thing that I wish I'd gotten to do is the hang gliding, paragliding stuff. I saw various people doing that, and seeing it firsthand, I was like, damn, I wish, that just seems like so much fun. I wish I would get to do that. But we did get to bike around everything, and you can buy all kinds of bikes. You can buy a road bike, a mountain bike, a gravel bike, an e-bike. We just had like a regular gravel bike. There are lots of hills and things like that, but it's only like 26 kilometers, which isn't really that bad. We're talking like 14, 15 miles maybe, give or take. I don't know, something like that. It's not a lot to bike ultimately, but we did make various stops along the way to see stuff and whatever else. It is a very picturesque area in general. After the bike ride, we went to get lunch. Now, the thing that you have to understand is that they have kind of like lunch hours, and then a lot of restaurants stop down and then pick up at dinner time. So, there's very few restaurants that are open at any given time. We got back into the city around like 2 or 3 p.m. and most places were closed, and so we had to like go to the places that we knew were open. And there's plenty of them, you just have to note that and, act accordingly, let's say. In the evening, we were set to go see Into the Mortal World, which was a Chinese film that was in competition. Now, I was registered. My mom, unfortunately, was not registered, but based on my experience, it was like, hey, let's get there. We'll get there a little bit earlier. You'll wait in the area without registration, and we'll find a way to get you in. And I got seats at the end, literally the last row, kind of by the entrance, and I had my seat. I saved her a seat so that way, she could come in and just essentially see me. This was a movie in Mandarin with French subtitles. It was a good thing for me to sort of practice some of my French. They say you should be able to watch a movie and understand everything. Well, this was one of those things that overall, my mom certainly doesn't speak Mandarin, I don't, but she doesn't even really know French. We just kind of absorbed everything through the visuals, and for the most part got the story, which is really cool. And this was actually at one of the theaters that is a little bit further out, where we wanted to see the short films. Because it was Saturday, we were like, okay, well, we have the time to go there, let's see this place. By the end of this, it made you realize how big this festival really is, of all the various locations. There's the Bon Louis, the Imperial Hotel, the Campus Mifa, the Annecy Dome, you have the Arcane exhibit, and then you have like these smaller screenings. So, you just start to discover all these like little areas where the festival is, and there's so much. One of the things I definitely wanted to do on this day was, there was a store at the Bon Louis that had all kinds of animation stuff. So comic books, figurines, artwork, movies, things of that nature. And they had official Annecy merch. And one of the things that they had was a DVD of the past year's movies. So I went ahead and I got that because I was curious, and I wanted to also try to get this year's, but obviously that wasn't ready because this is essentially just the festival winners. And so the festival winners weren't at that time announced yet, right? Which makes sense. We did that, and we kind of did some like shopping for people and making sure that we got what we needed. But we had a final dinner that night, knowing that essentially the next day we were just gonna take the train to Geneva and then fly home. We had booked tickets for a bus to essentially ensure our spot that went from Annecy to Geneva, and we booked it, so we got the time. We weren't waiting on other people, stuck in line or something like that, and then ended up missing things. The ticket that I guess we booked took us from Annecy to Geneva, but not directly to the airport. It took us to like this stop in Geneva, and then we had to take a bus to the airport, which kind of defeated the purpose, but it is what it is. Like, luckily at this point, we've dealt with so much travel stuff that we were just very amenable and able to, just reroute as necessary. The one thing about Geneva that's interesting is they don't tell you the gate number until a specific time. That's all fine and well, except by the time that we learned what the gate number was, we didn't realize that we had to go through customs to get out of there. So it was just kind of like we were caught off guard, and we were actually eating breakfast. They're just kind of hanging out. By the way, great food at the Geneva airport. Like truly, truly fantastic stuff. And so we were kind of chilling there, and it was like 2 minutes after the gate was supposed to be announced. And I said to my mom, like, hey, we're essentially done here. Like, let's just go wait at the gate. And thank God we did, because when we got there, we're like, oh, we have to go through customs and whatnot. And so had we like just chilled and then like gone much later, we probably would have missed the flight. So just little things like that I wish they let you know and prepared you for and stuff like that. But I'm sharing it now so that way you know. And essentially we flew home. Luckily this time around, our flight from Geneva to JFK and then JFK to LAX, like we had no hiccups. So all in all, that's my experience of Annecy. Woo-wee! What a long episode this has been. But as mentioned at the top, the length truly is indicative of how much value I try to bring to this, right? Through my experience, I want to be an avatar, a surrogate for you, the audience. Now, there's so much jam-packed in here, but there's still other stuff to answer, specifics about logistics and things of that nature. And because of that, I felt it would actually be better if I did a part 2 that's more of an FAQ, right? Frequently asked questions, where I just broke that stuff down. Obviously pulling from my experience, but just very much kind of like, question and answer. Here's what you might be asking, and here's the direct answer to that. Look out for that episode coming soon, as it may very well answer a lot of the questions you may have. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it precludes you from asking said question in the comment section down below. I would encourage you to do so. I would love to continue this conversation in that way, see what you found helpful, see things that you still are curious about, things that you want to know more about, all that good stuff. I truly want this to be as informative as possible. This, along with the upcoming part 2, the FAQ, is really meant to round out the full Annecy experience. So you have a good, clear vision of what you might be getting into if you so choose to go, which I hope you do, and I hope to see you there in the coming years. If you found something useful, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing with friends, and you can explore my films, books, and writing at philsvitek.com. And if you want deeper access, direct interaction, and ways to support my creative work, I have a Patreon page. Everything's linked in the description. However you engage, thanks for being a part of it.